Welcome back to another Cinema 4D and Redshift tutorial today. Earlier this year, I did this render with fluids in a glass. Now, I actually did this in X Particles. But then probably about 2 weeks after I made this render, Cinema 4D fluids came out. So this tutorial's been on my mind throughout the year, and I thought, well, I might as well just do it with Cinema 4D fluids. It means more of you can follow along, and it is a relatively easy simulation to do. And it's a nice little bit of practice using particles in a slightly smaller space and balancing that and understanding it. The benefit of doing it in X Particles is, of course, you could do a similar simulation with grains. And there was a lot that I did in my simulation where I data mapped turbulences in a certain way to get them to move in a certain way and do a certain thing, which we won't be able to do as easily, but the general effect, yeah, you can pretty much get it one for one. Of course, as always, first 10 people that hit that link in the description, you'll get the Patreon for free for a whole month. But if you missed that, don't worry, just use code XMAS and you will get 50% off for the rest of the month. The other thing I want to mention is, of course, the one-to-one coaching. Links in the description. If you want to reach out and get personalized coaching and help your renders, there'll be more on that a little bit later, but the link's there as well. Without much more being said, let's go make this render. So to begin and start off, basically any glass you probably need to make one of these renders is in the glassware models on Grayscale Gorilla. And these glassware models also weren't actually out when I made this render, but I used a glass very, very similar to this Bistro juice glass. So if you're going to follow along and you've got GSG+, I would just suggest using one of these, as I often feel like glass models are quite expensive online, but they're also relatively easy to model if it's simple ones. The more kind of rich ones can be a bit of a pain, but I think it's super important here to use one where you might come across glass models and a lot of the grooves and stuff are normal maps, especially on glasses, more like these fluted ones. But I think it's really important with this that you use ones that are actually have the geometry modeled into them. But there's some here that I can imagine would look really, really cool, especially like a wine glass with this effect. But I'm going to use one very, very similar to what I did the initial render with, and I think I'm going to use this one, the water one, because I think it's a little bit thicker. I can't actually tell the difference, but I'll drop this one in. First thing you're going to notice, it's going to come in pretty small. We don't want it that small because we're doing a simulation. We want this much bigger. I also wouldn't really tend to render at that size anyway. I'm kind of an advocate for keeping everything at default size. I won't ramble about that. We've got the glass. And we've got the liquid, and that's why the GSG ones are also great, because if we didn't have the liquid, we would have to make it ourselves. We would have to use a part of the glass and then create a volume on the inside. So we can use this liquid to spawn the particles, and we can use that as the particle spawn. But yes, I would just scale this up to roughly the size of a cube in the ballpark. And if I come to the cube and I turn on X-ray, you have a look at this, you can see that there. So if I just turn that cube up, you can see, okay, we're in the ballpark. Cool, great. So we have the glass, and that's great, and we can call that glass, and we have the liquid. Let's call this liquid, delete the material, I don't want the material. And inside the liquid spawn, I think it's quite important here that we do Shift-C, axis center, and we select all these and hit execute. And then if I come to the glass and I enable X-ray, you can see that volume in the inside. So if we grab that and we just scale it down a little bit, what we're going to do is spawn all the particles in that and then drop them against the glass. So we can pull these out for now, and we can put them in our own null. So let's be tidy from the beginning. And let's drop in a null. And I'm going to put 2 hashtags on that, because I'm going to come back to it later. And if we call this geo, so our scene geo will go in here. The next thing we need is a liquid fill emitter. So we'll go to simulate emitters and we'll grab a liquid fill. Now if I duplicate that again and I call this particles, and we put our particle group in here, and in the liquid fill emitter we can spawn inside of geometry, which is great. So we're going to take the liquid spawn and we're going to spawn in there, and if we turn that off and you hit play, once the particle engine gets itself up and running and chugging along, particles are going to spawn inside the liquid spawn. And crikey, this is taking a second. There we go, they spawned, they fell, that's cool, that's great. Let's do Control D and let's go to Simulation, Scene, and turn off the gravity. So we get the gravity off, and then we go back to the liquid fill emitter, go to properties, and we're going to scroll down, and we're going to check the liquids don't have any speed. Yep, I've been using X particles a lot recently, so I'm half expecting, I believe, yeah, the liquid fill emitter does not come with speed. No. Here's what we're going to do next. We're going to go to properties, and we're going to override the radius here away from the simulation scene, because I want it to be in one place. I don't want to have to go all the way over wherever it is. We're going to come to the particle group, we're going to hit draw radius, and we're going to turn it into 001, and that's going to give us the true radius value of the particles. So now, if we come to the glass and we right click and we go to simulation tags collider, very important we change this to both, and then we go to simulate and we go to forces and we drop in a gravity, and we just put that in the particle group. I mean, it doesn't even have to be in the particle group, to be honest, but let's actually put it below the emitter and put the emitter at the top. And now we're going to hit play, and the liquid's going to drop, and it's going to fill the space, but it's going to be very jittery and very odd. Now, to stop that jittering non-stop, what we want to do is just come to the collider tag. We are just going to set the liquid collisions to surface, and you can see they just calm down, and then they're not so angry anymore. They're not jittering non-stop. But of course, what we want to do next is get some more particles in here, because this is not enough, unless that's what you want, but I want way more, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to increase my frame size quickly, 333, nice, even, whole number. Okay, so in the liquid fill emitter, we have the simulation scene again. I don't understand. I'm going to overwrite this. I want this here. Distance, this is going to control the amount of particles we have in the scene. So if I select the particle group and I go to point mode, you can see I've got 2,163 particles. And this is really important among any of your particle simulations that you do, because particles are just points. That's all you need to know about particles. They're just points, right? You're just spawning in points and making them do crazy things. So this is really important to view your true particle count, because you might have a normal emitter and you might have this at 30,000 particles or whatever, right? Or 50,000 particles. And you're spawning in 50,000 particles and you're spawning that in per sec. But then you're not watching out and you're not killing the particles after a certain amount of time. So then you could have a 10-second animation at 300 frames and you're actually spawning in something, more like 2.5 million particles, 5 million particles. You get what I'm saying, right? So the number you set here is not actually the true particle amount. And this is also really important to check, because you could have particles dying when they're not supposed to based on certain modifiers you have in the scene or whatever you're doing. So super important to always check this and make sure that this aligns with what you want here. Anyway, if I set this to 4 and then I hit play, that's going to be too many particles based on their radius, because this is another thing. Generally, the more particles you spawn in, the smaller you're going to have to make them. So I spawn this in now, they're going to blow up, right? So now what I have to do is decrease the radius. Now we're going to try and work down to a radius of 1, but we'll just do it in small increments. But you can see now I select the particle group, I've got 7,000 particles. For this simulation, yeah, we don't need like a crazy amount, but if we set this down to 2 and see if that causes a big explosion, yup. Let's do 3 for now. Can we do 3 and 2? Let's do 1.5. 0.5, and that works for now. Now I think this is a good working count until we want to increase what's going on here. Another thing I'm going to take a look at is in the properties, you scroll down, you got this color tab stuck away. Now this is actually really cool for simulations like this. Reason being is we've got this noise mode, right? And this is awesome because, take a look at this, is we can stick a noise to the particles. And we stick that noise to the particles and you hit play. You've got that noise stuck on there. So you can imagine what's going to happen. We put turbulence on that and they're like whirling around each other. That's really cool. So we could like increase the scale. I mean, actually the scale's kind of good. We could just maybe increase the contrast, something like that. So if I turn off the glass for now, I don't really need to see that. Well, I kind of do, but at the same time, we can turn it off. We will simulate forces, turbulence. Let's put this in below the gravity. Let's do 50% on a strength of 25. And there you go. It starts moving. Starts looking awesome. But that's quite sludgy. And just like that at the beginning, I want it tossing up. I want it moving about. Don't worry about those bits that escaped. We will tackle those little naughty fellas when we need to. If we set this to aerodynamics wind, I think this can generally potentially look a little bit better for what we want. Aerodynamics wind. That's cool. Just checking in the collider. I think this is fine. Can maybe decrease the bounciness. We are going to want them to stop escaping. The other thing as well is just you could scale this down more, because if you have a look kind of where it is on the edges, and then if I play forward one frame, you have a look at the particles and the way they're spawning in, you can actually see they're not spawning in against the geometry very well. They're a bit voxely. It's a very voxely shape, isn't it? So if you come back to the emission, now we're not on grid. We are on sphere packing. But if we change that to grid and you hit play, you can see that just packs them a little bit nicer. So if you hit play on that, let's see. Yeah, we still get bits escaping. But anyway, back to what I was saying, as I was suggesting that if you just scale that down a smidge, and if you also try and get a little bit of a look at where that geometry is on the floor, you might not want them dropping so much. You might want that sat a little bit closer. But also, you can just see it there, that's the floor. So we need to try and stop them escaping through. And to be honest, I was going to wait and like tackle this later on, but now it's on my mind. You could increase substeps and see if that solves the problem. It does not solve the problem. Just to double check if it's the substeps, whack it up to a stupid number. And they're still escaping. So you know it's not the substeps. What if it's just the iterations and the normal simulation settings? I don't actually know if they affect particles. I don't think they do. They might do. But the first thing I want to manage just right now is that sludginess. So if you come to the liquid fill emitter and we go to properties and we bring the target density down to 100, and for a viscosity and surface tension, we don't actually want much at all. So let's do like 0.005 and 0.005, and then let's introduce some damping. Set it to 3%. Again, hit override, come back to the beginning, hit play. And then once we get our forces in there, they're going to kind of bounce about the way that I want them to bounce about. We don't want to deal with bits like this. We really, really don't want to deal with that. Now, we could mess with substeps. We could try and change things in the collision settings. There's a whole bunch of things. Maybe, you set this back to front. Hey, what do you know? That fixed it. So, there you go. Okay, so now what we need to do is come and mess with these forces. We don't want the particles to escape the glass, really, unless that's what you're going for. We want the particles to move about within the glass. But here's another thing, is I need more particles. I want them sat near the surface of the glass. And of course, they're spawning in this geometry, but then they're packing down, and they're moving down to the bottom. So the ways around this is going to be to increase the size of the geometry we're spawning in. Just move it up. Make it a little bit bigger as well, and see if that increases the density of them. As you can see, it does. Now, this might be enough height. And reason being is because we are going to mess with this so much and put in so many turbulences that it might just be enough height. So if we add another turbulence, we call this first one big. So if you think of this as our big movement, this is the turbulence that's causing just this whirl. Right? But then we add in another turbulence. And if this turbulence we set to a scale of 15%, we just keep the strength the same, you can see that this is going to add more aggression in the middle. So let's even go smaller. Let's go 10%, but let's put the strength up to like 55. So you can see that's like really, really super aggressive. Maybe try 35, but you mix them together, and now you've got those two movements mixed. And you get something a little bit like this, which looks cool. But that is, still too aggressive. So let's do 20% and a strength of 15. So that one's not quite as strong, and that's cool. But then we want, this one was, let's make this one medium. Let's call this one small. And then I want to do one more that's not going to be as common. It's not going to be as much of a frequency, but it's going to be kind of causing big rifts every now and then in the liquid. So if we put the scale to something like 125, but we put the frequency to 50, and then we put the strength to 45, I guess, and we hit play with just this one, now what we're going to see, that one's causing, it's kind of like sludging the whole liquid to one side. And it's kind of going a bit slower and it's moving it about. You can see how that's causing a little bit more. Bring the frequency back up. That's not enough frequency. So there we go. It's causing these big bits of height where it goes up and then comes down again and then goes up and then comes down again. So if you mix those together, and that big turbulence is really thrashing them up, and then the medium one's kind of causing the spin, but then the small one's kind of causing volatility on the surface, you mix them all together and you get something quite cool. Bits like that, there you go. But we want a little bit more separation here in the particles. You can see right now when they move up, they're still kind of one big mesh. I want all of these particles, when they slosh up, I want them to kind of be, I want them to break a little bit more, because I'm going to do this render with rocks. So we could actually lower the viscosity and the surface tension even more and see if that helps. Just like that, it looks like it is helping. Because I want them to splash a little bit more. And this will also come to life a little bit more when the particles are smaller. But there you go. They're kind of separating the amount that I would want now. And if you turn back on the glass and you have a look, you see how it kind of climbs up and then comes back down. So what we need to manage now is we kind of need to stop them from bulging out and spitting out. We could kill them, but I don't really want to do that. I might do it, but what we could do is kill all the ones after the initial splash and then start the simulation later on after we've cached and got an alembic and stuff. But the reason I don't want to do that is because you might have a simulation where some of these spill out and you want them on the floor. And if we set up bounds where they die if they come outside of the glass, that won't then be as possible unless you were to keyframe it and turn it off or something, but then you're getting a little bit finicky in the details. So I would rather just manage it. The other thing we could do is just put a collider on top of the glass, and that would stop it. So what if we were to test that? What if we grabbed a cylinder and we just put it above just ever so slightly and we popped a collider on it? Turn it off. It kind of solves most of your issues, doesn't it? So if you drag this into Geo and you call it glass bounds, cool. That's there. That's looking nice. That's great. That's basically the simulation set up. There is a couple of other things we need to do now to get this where it needs to be. We need to add rotational data, and I'll go through a couple of other ways we could maybe modify it and do a couple of cool things. We've encountered some problems. We've overcame those problems. The particles were slipping through the geometry. And we solved that by changing the collision type. The particles were also spilling out of the glass too much, and we just kind of, it's equivalent of putting a coaster on top of a glass, you know, we just put something on top of it. The thing is with that is you might not want them to look like they're being like stubbed. You know, if you've got like a really violent simulation and they fly up, you don't want them to look like they're hitting a wall. So I would be delicate with that. The other way around it would be to just manage the simulation, and you could kind of manage it enough and you could get it to a point where that doesn't happen. The other thing we're going to do before we go and make these final changes is have a look at different ways we can do some color, because the noise looks really good, but the problem is as you get further and further into the simulation, it kind of gets whirled up so much that you just end up with random color as opposed to that really nice pattern of color. And it looks really good early on because you get these bits being stretched out and pulled, but then eventually they get so messed up that it doesn't look so good. So we'll have a little look at some different color we can do, and we will tidy up and finish up some little bits of the simulation, and then from there we will go and do a nice little render. So let's go over adding that color data. So we'll go to Simulate, Modifier, and Color Mapper. And there's a couple more things we need to do on top of this color before we can cache the simulation and get to making a render with it. One of those is going to be just adding this color, but of course if you want to use the noise that we set up earlier, you can do that. But I'm going to set up this color mapper. We're going to maybe increase the count a little bit. As you can see right now, we've got 17,000 particles. And if we turn on the glass and look at that, using rocks and some sort of stuff like that, like it probably will look fine on 17,000, but I'm going to try and just get it a little bit higher. And because of that, because I'm using rocks, we're going to need to add rotation data. If you don't know what that is these particles by default, they don't come with rotation data. So if you were to render these as spheres, you wouldn't notice that because they're just spheres. But any object that has sides to it, you would see that they're basically all sticking the same direction. So we need to make sure that they spin. But anyway, first of all, we're going to do this in the color mapper. We're going to get this color going. So I'm just going to put it against the velocity, and I'm going to put it against the magnitude of the velocity. And if we hit play on that, you can see that now the color is moving through everything based on the velocity of the particles. But it's a little bit too contrasty. So if we set the upper to 250, and then we go back to the beginning and we hit play, you can see that's a little bit softer now. I'm going to change the colors, and the colors that we select here don't matter, but the amount of data on this gradient does matter. So we need to take advantage of that, and we need to get as many colors in here as we want, even though in render we might only use 2 or 3 colors. Having more data in here is quite important, and that's all these colors are. The fact that they're blue or purple or white in the viewport is really just for fun. It's really, it's just for enjoyment, but it doesn't mean anything. But what's the problem here with this color is you see all this white stuff down here, and then the color's kind of sitting around the top. It's not like it doesn't look terrible, but it's not what I want. I want more of this color oozing through the entire simulation. Now, why do you think that is? We need to have a little think about why you think that is. If we're against the velocity and we can't see the color that we want, then what do we need? We need more velocity. So coming back to the turbulences, what we need to do is we need to make the smaller turbulence, because we want more kind of tactile type velocities, you know what I mean, like smaller strands of it and stuff. We need that smaller turbulence to be stronger. So if we make that stronger, what happens now? We have way more color in the parts that I want. So we don't need it that strong, but with it a little bit stronger, you can see it's a little bit better. We're getting some color through there. So let's add another color here. Let's make it go orange as well. So we go from blue to purple, maybe go a little bit pinkish, to orange to white. Now what do you see? Even more color. That's great. So now you see that color pretty much oozing through the entire thing. But the simulation could be a little bit more violent now. So what if we put this small turbulence closer to the top? Now, I was doing some tests kind of in between segments of the tutorial, and it did feel like having it at the top made a difference at one point, but I don't really know if it does. Either way, I'm pretty happy with this. The other thing we could do is add a friction, and if we added that friction, we may be able to retain some of that velocity while calming everything down a little bit. All I want to make sure is that that color is kind of oozing through everything, but I don't want it to be too flickery. And there is some parts of it here that feel like it could be potentially a little bit flickery. And the way we're really going to get around that is going to be messing with these upper and lower values. So if we came up to 300, but then came up to like 10, that might smooth it out a little bit, and that might help us. But we're also going to retime this, and we're going to slow a lot of this down. So I wouldn't totally worry about it too much. What I'm going to tackle now is getting more particles in the scene. So like I said, we have 17,000. Now what's going to happen when we add more particles into the scene is some of the issues we had to solve earlier, like particles snapping through the glass or bulging at the top, might come back again. And that's something you always have to think about when you're increasing particle counts. So if I decrease the radius to a radius of 1, and I decrease the distance to 2, and I just go forward 1 frame and spawn them in, we now have 60,000 particles. Now I don't want that many particles. I think I want about 40,000 particles. So if I set that to 2.5 and come in, we now have 30,000. So that's kind of a nice medium. So what if I did a radius of 1.5 but a distance of 2? So just a slightly different setup. Go forward. I'm back on 60,000 somehow. Oh, that's because the radius doesn't affect it. I'm too X particles brained. Okay, kids, don't get X particle brained. Like me, it's not good for you. 1.5. Maybe 30,000 is enough. Suddenly we're on 143,000. That's not what we want. That's because I'm on 1.5. 2. 2. And that's 60,000, and that's on a radius of 1. So let's do 2.5 and a radius of 1. How did I get that to 30,000? What have I done? Oh my god. There we go. Okay, we're on 30,000. If we hit play on 30,000, like I said, some are escaping, but it's also like we're really falling down to the bottom of the glass now. And I'm not sure how much I like that, because now we're going to have to do things to get this back up. So I want to sit around a number of 30 to 40,000, but I want this to fill the glass. So if I come to a radius of 1.5 now, okay, so now we're sitting really close to the top on that 30,000. So that's on 1.5. So we should be able to get there just by changing the radius. So what if we did 1.25? Now we're kind of back to the level that we were used to. See if we can get it coming up close. There is bits of it, but it's not quite getting there. Oh, there's some bits. So let's do 1.35 and just sit a little bit higher. And don't worry about that beginning bit where it's crazy, because we'll cut that out. Yeah, that looks fine. But the beginning bit, there's some particles escaping. What if we set this back to volume now? What happens? Somehow, some way, for some reason, they don't escape. Now, why did we set that to surface in the beginning? That was because when we spawned them in, they were jittering. But we're not really going to see that jittering now because all of them are moving. And just to test, if we turn off the turbulences and have a look, do they jitter? They are jittering a little bit. But who really cares when they're doing this the whole time? We're moving around a little bit at the bottom. So let's compare this movement at the bottom here. Let's compare the jitteriness and see which problem we like more. Do they really look that much smoother? No. So we're going to go back to volume in the end. And we're going to leave that there. Now, for some reason in my other scene, I had thickness on 10 centimeters. I don't know why I did that, but it was on 10 centimeters. I had a look at a scene and it was on 10. The version of me from the past knew something that I don't. And that's why I did it. Either that or I just mindlessly slapped the number there for the sake of it. But you never know. You never know. I'm going to drop this glass bounce just a little bit because some of them are going a little bit too high. And what I'm going to do is kind of like increase the bounciness. So if they do hit that, they're just going to whack right off of it again. We're not really going to see any gliding around it. I don't want them to graze around it because there was some bits there where they just clung on a little bit too long. And we don't want that. We don't want that. But I'm pretty happy with this, especially for the tutorial. I think, if anything, I'm still maybe a little bit mad at the color data. I think we could be getting more color in here, but it's based on the velocity, right? And if there's not much velocity going on at the bottom because those particles can't move very much, then that's just how it is. I'm going to save this, and I think pretty happy here. What we could maybe do is just have one more look at the color. We could maybe get some of the blue back in there and push these along a little bit just to make sure that's all fine. I'm pretty happy with this. Let's get that spin in there. And then once we get that spin in there, we can cache the simulation. So one thing I had done is this was on axis. This was on plus Z. I had set a velocity in the particles of 50 centimeters. Yet again, I don't quite know why I had done this, but I did do it. Now, I think I know why I did this. Is if you watched my fluids tutorial when fluids came out, for some reason the spin modifiers weren't working for me. They would not spin the particles no matter what. They were not having it. So I figured out a way to spin them with this velocity tab here. Now we're going to set this to 100%. I'm going to set the speed to 50 and we're just going to leave that there. We're going to add a spin. Just one spin. We're going to set this to spin vector. We're going to set this to velocity direction. The last time I did this, I swear it didn't have all these settings, but I'm just going to leave that like that, because then what you usually do is you add another spin modifier, and in this one you set the speed. So we'll set the speed to about 50 degrees, and that should be good. So just to test, if we grab a cube, what's the radius of our particles? 1.35. Let's just do 1. That's going to be too small though, isn't it? The particles are bigger than that. That's tiny. Anyway, just to test before we cache. I'm going to hit save again. just play in a little bit. We'll open Redshift. We're not going to do any lighting or anything. We're just doing a little test to make sure. Let that render in. Cool, so we can see the particles. We're going to add a RS object to the particle group. We're going to go to custom objects, and we're just going to drop in the cube. Now the particles haven't spun that much, but we're only 20 frames in, so let's pause this, and then let's play through a little bit. Now have the particles spun any more? A tad, but not that much. It's a little bit noisy. I want all of these particles at totally random directions. So if we come back to the spin here, we're on velocity direction. Let's try that on random. Let's restart the simulation. Let's hit render around 20 frames again. That's more like it. Completely random. So there you go. There's your settings. Play through this a little bit more. Take another look, and yep, completely random. So that's fine. We can delete the cube. We can leave that tag there. We are good to cache. Now, I'm not going to lie, when I did look at that, the velocity direction one was quite cool, but we just need a little bit more randomness, I think. Anyway, let's cache this. So we'll go to particle group, we'll go to cache, and we'll hit cache object. We'll pick where the cache goes, and then we'll do a little retime, and then make a little render. You know, something I do really, really like about lower particle simulations, like particle simulations with only 30,000 particles, 40,000 particles, is the fact that it's going to cache in about 30 seconds. Because on the grains tutorial, when I was doing those renders like a month ago, those caches were taking like 2 hours, some of them, 3 hours. And to be able to do a cache like this, to the point I don't even have to cut it out of the video, you can just sit and watch it with me, it's blissful. It's very, very blissful. Anyway, now it's cached. Let's go to time remapping. So hit play on this. Oh, I forgot about this. The fact that it goes all disgusting in the viewport after you cache it. I swear there was a way around that. Either way, it's what keeps it fast. What we're going to do is... Can we not keep the color? I swear there's a way. I swear there's a way. There has to be. Anyway, we're going to grab... Actually, right-click on this and hit Show in Separate Window. And then you can make this way bigger, which is going to make your retiming job a little bit easier. Let's say the animation's 150 frames. So we cached 333. What we can do now is just kind of go crazy. So I can lift this up at the beginning. So now you can see that it doesn't start at the beginning where they'll drop down, but we can get them moving a little bit. And then we can have it jump up at the beginning. Now, what I kind of did on my retime on my Xparticles one is I would kind of bump it up a little bit like that, and then I would add another point, and I would make it go slow for a second, and then I would bump it again, and then I would make it go slow for a second, and then I'd bump it again, and then I would just kind of do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then make it go faster towards the end. So the other thing to remember is this end point is 300 frames. So we're not actually going to end here. So what I'm going to have to do is move all these along until the particles stop. So rather than moving all of them, we'll just move the end one. And if we move it to here, for example, do we get them to freeze? No. So what we need to do is test this and see when they freeze. When do they freeze? When do they freeze? Just keep moving these along. Don't care about where they are. Don't care about where they are. We need to figure out where the end is. Jesus Christ, where's the end? What is happening? Now half of this could be because I'm not at the top. So I think I'm being an idiot. Okay, we've got them stopping. So, okay, where's the end? Well, it'll be 0.5, won't it? Right, so we don't care about them being at the end. We really, really don't care. So, a little bit slow, a little bit fast, a little bit slow, a little bit fast. Slow, fast, slow, fast. Okay, cool, right, whatever. Let's just go back here. And then let's go here. Let's do this. Back and forth, back and forth. You can retime this any way you want. You don't have to do what I'm doing, because I'm just a stupid idiot that doesn't know what I'm doing. Anyway, slow, fast, slow, big jump. Slower, then another big jump. I'm going to make these jumps more aggressive, and I'm going to use more of the timeline. So let's do bigger and bigger jumps, but let's also make these jumps more steep. And then let's have it get faster towards the end. But we don't want it to look sped up. You want it to look fast, but you don't want it to look sped up, and that's quite important. So you need these to kind of be not these bits where it gets faster. You need it to kind of not happen for too long. So you can see here, this bit here goes fast for way, way too long, but it's also going too slow when it goes too slow. So this is more like it. It's just this bit here that's just staying too fast for too long. Yep. It's just this one. Let's sharpen that. Sharpen this. I mean, half of the issue here as well is like, we're ending about here. So although I'm doing this, it's not really framed properly against the timeline. We just need to speed that up. So we find that 0.5 point again, and that would be because the 0.5 is hitting there. So we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, and then put this near the 0.5, drop it. Yep, cool, and then it's ending too soon, so yep. And then we just need those jumps now to be less of a jump. So you can still see they're jumping a little bit too much. And let's actually decrease the amount of jumps. So let's just do 2 jumps. And they're getting too slow. So let's keep it a little bit more of a rhythm. And then yes, let's have it not go up so much at the end, because we need this to be super smooth. Let's kind of move around this a little bit. Let's watch it from a distance, because then we can't see like every single little thing going on. Slow it down a little bit. I didn't think the retiming would take this long. I really do apologize. I really do. But you've got to get this right. This is vital. It's absolutely vital. Now what I'm actually just going to do, I'm actually just going to move. You see, if we just move this up in the timeline, I can just change where it's at in the simulation. So if I didn't really like the jumps and the bits going on, I could just do it a little bit later on instead. So I'm also going to have that jump be shorter. And then I'm going to add a point here just to kind of control this one. And then we'll move them back down again. And this is too steep. So we'll drop that and move it once more. I wonder how many of you have like retimed this exactly how you want it. And you're just watching me struggling. Right, okay, that's fine. We'll leave it there. Cool. Okay, so we've got the glass. Let's turn the glass on, let's hit save. I am going to go and get some rocks from another scene. Usually I use ones from Polygon, but I will also say the ones from GSG are really, really good as well. So if you wanted to use any of these would certainly do the job. But I'm going to go use some actual rocks. Okay, so I've got these rocks. Let's put them in here. And this is what always bugs me about the Polygon rocks. Let me delete those materials because they're from the other scene. This is what always bugs me about the Polygon ones is that for some reason they come in on a scale, like a fake scale of 100. And that always just bugs me. So you have to kind of set them all back to a scale of 1. And then gosh knows how tiny they are. And then scale them up normally to get them to a normal size. And if you want to kind of know what size they need to be, is if we set this to a scale of 1 with the cube, and then we have a look at the rocks there, we kind of need them in the ballpark, but we will set some scale variation between these. We can duplicate that null again, and we can call it particle objects, and then we can drop the rocks in there. And we can delete the cube, and then what we can do is we can get a Redshift camera, we can bring up the focal length, and we can go to our render settings. I would usually do 2560 by 1440, but I'll do 1920 by 1080 for the tutorial, just so things are a little bit snappier. And then we can go to Redshift, go to render view, and hit render. Okay, cool. So you don't want to see all these, so push them away. Then go to the Redshift tag on the particle group, custom objects, and we will drop them all in there. So if we turn off the glass for a second, why can't we see? Is this null glitch still a thing? My color's shown up now. Why is my color shown up now? So weird. Anyway, we've got the rock. The rocks are there. Now I dragged them out the null because there was this weird glitch for a while. I think it was Redshift, where if you had like the particle objects in the null, it just wouldn't show them. It was really quite weird. But let's grab a material. And then we will select all of these particle objects, right click, hit apply. We'll open this up and we will grab a user color data. So user color data, color user data, and then we'll pipe this into a rampity ramp, punch this in there, plug the ramp into the color, and we'll set this to presets, particles, particle color, and usually it won't show up. So you have to restart your render, but it has shown up, which is great. So just like my original colors, what did I do? I did like a couple of different colors. I did an orange one, I did a blue one. The orange one, I would have kind of went through the color a little bit like this. Actually, no, let's do the blue one, because in the blue one, I went through a couple of different blues. I went through a dark blue to a light blue. Now what we have to remember as well is we had this the other way in the color data. So we went through a dark blue through to like a pink, and then we went through to like an orange, but I'm just going to go through to like a darker kind of blue through to a white, a little bit like that. So we've got this one blue, and then we can maybe just get a lighter one in there as well. So just those kind of different shades of blue, I think you'll find make a nice difference to the render as they kind of push through, because then you're kind of going from a dark blue to a lighter blue to a pinky purple and then to a white. So you just kind of block off the color and layer it a little bit, as opposed to just having like two colors on their own. There's more of a fade, you know. Lighting. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a HDRI from Grayscale Gorilla. Now, strangely enough, the HDRI I used was one of these two. It could have been Cafe 02, which I know is probably a little bit of a busy HDRI compared to what you would maybe want to use for glass reflections and stuff. But if we take it off in the camera and then we come here and we turn off the saturation, so we've got a little bit of lighting there, and then we turn on the glass. And if this is our particle, this can be our glass material. So we put that on the glass. We call this glass. And as you can imagine, all we're going to do is crank up the transmission, turn down the roughness, and that'll be that for the glass material. Where's my color gone? I've lost my color. There we go. It's back again. So you can see already it looks cool. And what I love about this is, this render in particular, is the like little refractions of the particles inside the glass. I just think that looks awesome. But if we duplicate this again, and we'll call this lighting. So we'll put all our lighting in here and we'll duplicate it no more times. We'll just call this last one cameras. So put our camera in here, put our light in there, do a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to rotate this, find some cool reflections. I can imagine I went through a couple of different kinds of HDRIs and a couple of different kinds of reflections and stuff, because ideally you'd think this may potentially look better with more of like a gradient HDRI, so I might also switch to that during this render. In my render I had polygon bricks that were all like stacked up with a coaster on top. It was just a cylinder with a cork material from Grayscale Gorilla. But I think for this render, I'll just stick it on a floor, and we'll make the floor quite big, because I'm just going to show you how to make it look nice. So we've got this on a floor, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the HDRI and I'm going to exclude the floor from that. So the floor is not being affected by the HDRI at all, and that's cool. And then here we can drop this a little bit, because I will add a couple of different lights. So let's grab a gobo and let's just add let's grab one of the lines. So let's grab this one, and then I'm going to do F2, cameras, perspective, and then do NA for garage shading, take off the work plane. And I'm basically just going to add a big line, a big gateway going up the middle of this. Now, as you can see, this render is very, very blown out right now. So we're going to go to color correction, we're going to go to tone mapping, but we need to set this to the Redshift camera. And we're going to turn down the highlights, not that much because it flattens it out. Half of this is going to be the issue of the gobo being too bright. So we're going to drop that intensity back like that. Now, slight issue. You can see the lights coming this way, the shadows going that way. No, we don't want that. We want the shadow to be going the same direction. Now, I would assume that's to do with the texture. So we look at where the camera is. Why on earth would that light cause that to go that direction? Because I would think it's to do with the texture. Yeah. But I still can't understand why, because I definitely want this light in that direction. So I guess what I'm going to have to do is move this around until... This is so strange. Move that around until the light is... Well, the shadow's where I want the shadow to be. And then we will just rotate the gobo until the highlight is where I want the highlight to be. Because I think ideally, we'll increase that cone angle, make it a bit bigger. Because I think ideally you're going to want the light and the shadow facing the same way for the best looking render possible. I'm going to push this up into the sky a little bit. And what's cool about this, we can see the rocks there. That looks awesome. Now we turn back on the HDRI and let's have a little look. How does it look on the floor? The shadows are way too light. So what if rather than excluding it completely, we just turned down the diffuse? So we had some darker shadows, but it's not totally pitch black. And then we're actually pumping some more contrast into the rocks that way. That looks really, really cool. So we've got some reflections, we've got some lighting. We could maybe do a little concrete material. Now I remember freaking out when I did my render because I kept looking at like these bits and I kept thinking, oh, they're sticking through, I swear they're sticking through, but I mean, you can see they're not. Maybe there is a debate that they are slightly sticking through. So if you do really, really care, you could, or you want to test this, is I would suggest, I mean, it's cache, so it doesn't matter, but I would turn off the original glass object and duplicate a new one. Just scale it a smidge in case those rocks are poking through, because it looks like they actually might have been ever so slightly, but they do kind of look like reflections at the same time, so I wouldn't freak out too much. Now, if we come to these rocks, I pressed S on the keyboard there to flick to the rocks. I'm going to change the scale of a couple of them. So I'm going to make a couple of them smaller and a couple of them a little bit bigger. And that's going to bring, again, we're kind of back to suffering from that issue of them potentially poking through. I'm just going to encourage a little bit of scale variation, just a little bit. And then I'm also going to add a light to the scene. So I'm going to figure out where I can get this area light. And for this area light, I am going to exclude the floor. And I'm going to target just the same gobo light target. I'll take advantage of it. And we'll move it off to the side. I believe what I did with mine is... Turn off the HDRI for a second. I believe what I did with the light in my scene, I'm going to turn off the gobo of the viewport as well, because that's bugging me how bright it is. And we just drop the exposure to like -1. I believe all I did with my light was fill in the glass a little bit. So I'm facing the wrong direction. That's why my light was being weird. So I thought it was Redshift's fault, but it was actually just because I was looking at it from here the whole time. So I just want this behind there, and I want some fall off in that. So we could either keep decreasing that, but we're not really getting a whole lot from doing that. So I'm going to come to Grayscale Gorilla again. I'm going to go and find one of those area light maps. Where are they? Area light map. And then let's grab, I don't know, yeah, this one. Apparently I've not downloaded that one, but that one will be fine. Drag that into the texture. And then that's kind of like fading off now, right? So that looks cool. Just going to move it about a little bit. And then we'll bring back in the HDRI. I'm going to reduce the power a little bit. I've got lots and lots of reflections going on. And I did do my render on a still frame. But let's mess with the camera a little bit. So let's go and drop in the LUT. I mentioned these in every tutorial. They're on the Patreon, they're on the Discord. They're not my LUTs. I found them on a forum. Shout out Kmanland. Amazing LUTs. So you drop this in, set apply color management before LUT, drop the strength, turn on color controls, drop those shadows, increase those highlights, come back to the camera. Let's put the vignetting to 100, even more. Let's do 200, even more, and let's do 300. And then let's play with the blacks a little bit, just a tad, and then you can bump the saturation, bump the highlights again a little bit. Now, some of these rocks are maybe going too white. I don't know if it's the lighting, I don't know if it's the camera. I'm going to keep that camera there, but I'm going to make another one, and then we're going to move up closer. So we need to change this to the new camera. I'm going to move up closer. Now let's actually make call this one wide, duplicate it, call it square. Let's make this one a nice square. Let's come up super close. We've got a little bit of work to do on the lighting and look dev. Now I think I want the colors of the stones to be lighter. I think these are too dark. And I think there's too many white ones. Or not enough white ones, maybe. Yep. Let's take out... let's take out that blue. And then let's just make this one lighter. Even lighter. And then just make that darker. So instead of it kind of going light, you know, through a purple, it's going through just a darker blue. And then we'll go to the Redshift settings. And we'll go to advanced, we'll go to globals, and we'll set all these to 2020. 2020. That's fine. Still a little bit too bright here. So the global light, we could get rid of the particle objects. That could be one way. We could take the particle objects out of the HDRI. So there's a couple of things we could do. We could have a little mess around with excluding these objects from the HDRI, but I'm not entirely, from the global light, but I'm not entirely sure if that's what we want here. So we'll take that out. The area light, we could exclude them from the area light, but I don't think the area light is really doing anything to them right now. They're just a little bit too dark. So let's maybe increase the diffuse. Let's bring back some of those shadows. It doesn't look bad. Doesn't look bad. But you know, if you know my videos at all, you know I'm not gonna send you away until that render looks the way it's supposed to. Let's drop the intensity HDRI. Yeah, maybe we could do with lighting up the stones more here. My issue is the fact that they're just sort of blowing out there. The other thing we can do is we could increase the amount of subdivisions on the glass. So I'm going to pause the render while I do this. I'm going to overwrite this, turn on tessellation. I'm just going to drop this to 1 subdivision, hit render again, because I was just seeing some funky reflections. Let's come back to this light. Let's see, make sure this is set to the camera. Let's see what happens if we just push this around a little bit. And I will actually come up to 248 by 248. Just so I can see the sharpness of everything. And then let's skip through a few frames. Maybe like here. And let's get let's get more color. So let's push back the white. No, I don't want them that purple, of course. So let's actually kind of hard cut it a little bit more. Something like that. In this frame, it does feel like the particles haven't rotated enough. But I'm going to try and not think about it. Just come up a little bit. Play through. That's cool. So if we grab our focus object, we focus on the particles. Come to the camera. Come to optical. Set the aperture to 1. Turn on bokeh. Set it lower, let's do 0.1. Way too low. Let's do 0.5. Way too low. Let's do 0.9. And then let's have a look at actually focusing like here on the front rather than on the back. Too low. Let's do 1.3. Let's focus kind of about here. Problem is we're focusing on like the rim of the glass when I would actually want to focus kind of in the middle of the particles. Let's just do something like that. On the glass, let's drop the reflections. That is another thing I did. I dropped the reflections, because if you drop those reflections nearly entirely, and I mean you could also like drop the IOR, and I know there's like people watching that would not like that, but you could do it and change the render a little bit and maybe mess with the reflections. Who's really gonna know? Just saying. What I just want to figure out before I let you go is what's causing this kind of beam of light here, this beam of light here, this beam of light here. That is what's blowing out the render too much for me. So it is the gobo causing that massive highlight. But if I just whack this out the reflection, you can see that it's not actually the gobo itself hitting the glass. It is the floor bouncing back up to the glass. Because if I take out the diffuse, it goes away. So I could decrease it on the diffuse a little bit and soften those. Or, now this is a little bit cheeky, and this is a very unbiased render method that I wouldn't really suggest. You could take out the secondary ray, which is the light bounce, and then you could do more work on the glass and where you want the lights without necessarily worrying about that. But for me, it starts to cause a bit of a disconnection with everything. So I would rather find a natural way of doing this, which I think for me is going to be coming to that gobo, and it's going to be dropping the exposure a little bit, and we could maybe move it. Don't want to be tied to that position. Maybe we can cause more of a difference in the glass. And then with this area light, we could maybe push this back around. Which angle am I at here? I mean, look, I'm trying my best to give you guys a good render, but I'm sure a lot of your renders are going to look totally different, and this part of the video probably won't be the most follow-alongable of all time. But then let's just pop another light. Let's be cheeky. Let's throw another light down here on the particles. Nobody will ever know. And then let's pop this HDRI back up on the diffuse, so we're not in totally dark shadows. That's not having it now. What is going on? HDRI project. Delete that right there. Does it come back? Come back to the HDRI. Started to push this up in the diffuse, but we basically lowered the intensity all the way off. So let's just bring this back up a little bit and then come back to the vignetting. I was kind of joking about when I brought this all the way down to 150. Let's find a happy middle ground. Introduce some contrast back. Drop the camera. Move this first light back again. Too much reflection coming from it. So we'll drop the power to 25. That's better. Just get a nice gradient coming off of it. Nice little gradient. -2. And I've changed my mind on the gobo again. I don't like where it is. So push it all the way around there. It's not bad. Turn off the second light. Yep. Play with the curves. Increase the LUT. And then just to finish off, for the heck of it, let's make it orange. Let's make it orange. I've spent too much time. I mean, there's only so much I can do, and I spent like 20 minutes on a render. I'm sure you guys appreciate it either way. Go for more of this sandy kind of realistic tone. Something a little bit like that is kind of closer to what I had. And I think the rocks are too small. I think half the issue here, and this is gonna be a bit annoying because they probably will poke through the glass and I'll have to make the glass bigger, but I think the rocks, without them colliding with each other, should just be a little bit bigger, because I think that was kind of a key component of my scene. I think I was maybe on, I think the 17,000 that we were on may have been better. I think it may have been the better number, because I think this, I mean, this will look really good, I think, with tons and tons of particles, or not that many. I think probably the middle ground, it could get a little bit difficult, potentially. I think I'm relatively happy with this render, especially for 20 minutes on a video. I'm not going to go too crazy. Let's just add some bloom, even though Redshift bloom sucks. Let's get a little bit of bloom. Let's get a little bit of glare threshold. It's just a tiny bit. And then we will come up to our render settings. We will go to Redshift and we will go to motion blur. We will enable motion blur. We will set the steps to 8. Turn on deformation blur. We will set the time to 30. And then I will save this. And then I will do a bucket render and we'll see how good my 20-minute fluid glass render looks. I mean, I shouldn't really be pressuring myself so much to make like an absolutely insane render in 20 minutes. Sometimes these renders just take a lot longer, but you know how it is. I think, in all honesty, the reason I went to doing them on bricks as opposed to a floor was because I didn't have to deal with the shadows, and I could kind of get the glass to focus on itself a little bit more and stuff. So, you know, sometimes like these artistic decisions are because it makes it easier, because it allows you to not deal with a certain problem or something like that. But let's just tidy this back up. So let's put the lights in there. Let's put the plane down in here. You can see that's rendering, and just while that's rendering away, hopefully we get some bits with motion blur. We could actually just change the bucket size quickly to 256. Could pause this. Let's find like a fast frame. So that cache is actually just stopping a little bit too early. But let me make it a bit faster at the end. So I think the animation had actually stopped there, so there wasn't really any motion blur. And I've made the buckets bigger, so the render, yeah, there we go, look at all that. So there's a little look with motion blur, that looks cool. I think I actually just want to make a couple more changes. I was kind of going to wrap the tutorial up there, but you know what? I want to keep it going. I want to run it up, and I want to keep making this look better. So I'm actually going to remove that out of this reflection, and then I'm just going to spin the HDRI until I like what reflections are there. So maybe, yeah, something a little bit more like this. I think that's pretty cool. And then I think the last thing we need is a nice little concrete material. So let's grab a concrete material, and I don't know, let's grab this one, and then let's put this onto the plane, and you can see that doesn't look very nice. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull all of these maps over here, every single one. We're going to select all those, then we're going to right click on scale. Well, actually, before we do this, let's double click, let's add a value node, and then let's select all these, right click on the scale, connect node, existing nodes, float, and I'm going to set this to a scale of 2. And then when it eventually catches up, that should be a lot smaller. It's getting there. Let's do 4. And then let's add a color correction. So add the color correct, plug that in. And then we're going to take off all the saturation because I don't want any of that color. And can maybe leave a little bit, like a tiny little bit. I think you want it feeling that black and white. It was maybe a little bit too much. But I'm going to drop the scale even more, so let's do 6. It's not like we're really going to see much tiling here. Let's make this brighter. Yeah, let's move the gamma up. Again, I'm too octane brained. I'm too 2x particles brained. Now I have some kind of tactility on the ground. Okay, I'm more happy with this. I'm more happy leaving you with this render. I think the only thing is kind of the cheeky stuff I've done with the lights. Is this maybe feels a little disconnected from the ground, but nonetheless, I think we're good. If we were to just double check that is not moved through the ground, no, because the axis was at the bottom, so we're fine. Hit render on that. I changed that rendering to progressive because the buckets were just taking way too long. And I just wanted you to see the motion blur because it looks really, really cool. But there you go. It's a cool render. It is actually bugging me how disconnected that looks from the ground. But it's fine. The render looks great. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. These new fluids are really, really cool. And I'm enjoying making videos with them. So I hope you appreciate the mix between this and X Particles, because I'm always going to love X Particles, and I'm always going to keep making X Particles videos. But when I can figure out how to do something just as well in Cinema 4D Particles, I will do it. I won't shy away from it. And I'll try and bring that to you. But I hope you enjoyed that render. I hope you enjoyed making those simulations. And like I said, first time people hit that link, get Patreon for free for a whole month. I can't put these project files up because there's a bunch of GSG assets all over it. But that should just encourage you to make it yourself and to do it yourself and to have fun and to learn something new rather than just downloading a file. But don't worry, if you missed that link, of course, you can, like I said earlier, you can get the Patreon for 50% off using the code XMIS. And like I said earlier, if you're interested in the coaching, then the link's there. You can get on the email list, you can find out some more info, and if you want to book a call, and we can have a little chat and see if I can help you with some of your renders. That's all from me for now. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in 2 days.